Miquella's promised consort was a pretty big twist for those of us following the lore of Elden Ring. Many assumed the demigod who would have the closest relationship to Miquella outside of Malenia would have been Godwyn, as we came to understand that one of Miquella's goals was to give his brother a proper death, putting his body to rest after his soul was destroyed. This previously untouched-on relationship between Miquella and Radahn ends up changing what we thought the course of this DLC would be, and even adds context to the battle between Radahn and Malenia, a clash which we were never given enough information to understand the motivation behind, outside of, it was the Shattering and the demigods were warring. While ultimately, Miquella saw Radahn as a model of knighthood, the man most fitting to sit at his side as he ushered in an age of compassion. I believe the only reason the young lion was chosen was due to Miquella's childish hero worship of his brother, much in the same way Radahn looked up to Godfrey. Today, we're going to discuss the promised consort, and why he was chosen to help bring Miquella's dreams to life. Welcome back to Elden Lore, our long-running series diving into the people, places, and gods of the Lands Between and the Land of Shadow. If this is your first time finding the channel, welcome. We hope you can find answers to whatever lore questions you may have buried in our playlist of over 160 episodes. If you think we're missing something, just let us know in the comments and we'll see if there's enough information to create a new video around it. You could also check out our Discord if you want to join a community dedicated to FromSoft and our overall love of gaming in general. If you reach the end of this video and feel like we deserve it, please consider subscribing, but no pressure, because your viewership is always more than enough. With that said, let's talk about Miquella and his promised consort, Radahn. The remembrance of a god and lord tells us, Miquella saw in Radahn a lord, his strength and his kindness, that stood in stark contrast with their afflicted selves. And so Miquella made his heartfelt wish, that Radahn would one day be his king consort. We can see this wish for ourselves after defeating the duo. There's a lot to unpack here, and we'll start with the way Miquella viewed Radahn, as you could argue it mirrors how Radahn saw the first Elden Lord, Godfrey. Miquella seems to see Radahn in the same way much of the Elden Ring fandom does, as a paragon of virtue and a true warrior in the purest sense. But he also considers his brother to be kind, a side of Radahn that wasn't explored before Shadow of the Erdtree. Through this lens, we can recontextualize some of Radahn's actions through the history of the Lands Between. He clearly respected cultures outside of his own, likely due to being both of Carian and Erdtree descent. He learned the mysteries of gravity sorcery from the Alabaster Lords in order to protect Celia, and befriended an Albinoric who studied alongside him, coming to form a brotherly bond with Gaius, someone his own family likely would have seen as inferior. He used his mastery of gravity sorcery to ensure that he would never be without his closest animal companion, Leonard, and he held back the stars themselves, knowing that it would cause his own fate, and that of his family, to be held in place, because he wanted to keep the people of the Lands Between safe from the monstrosities that litter the cosmos. In Miquella's eyes, these were all acts of a man who believed in kindness as strength, a man who sought the throne of the Elden Lord in order to be a virtuous ruler. But it's possible this was simply a naive, childish way to view Radahn. Redmane Freya speaks on Radahn multiple times through her questline, even going as far as to say war suited him best, rather than dying through the festival he was promised by Jaren. If the rest of the Redmane shared this sentiment, it's likely he was seen by his own troops as a man of action and war, rather than a ruler interested in creating a kinder world. His march against the capital city was a clear bid for power, and if Radahn truly was this paragon of virtue, fit to create a new age, then I sincerely doubt that Morgott would have stopped him from ascending to the throne. If we look at Radahn through the lens of the man he molded himself after, we can understand the great legacy he felt he needed to live up to. Radahn's lion armor tells us, the golden lion is said to symbolize Godfrey, the Elden Lord, and his beast regent, Sarosh. From his youngest years, Radahn was naturally captivated by the Lord of the battlefield. Radahn modeled himself in the image of his hero, the fearsome warrior and first Elden Lord to Queen Marika, which may mean his pursuit of strength was first and foremost an attempt to become like the man who brought the entire lands between under one rule. His helm goes on to further explain how Radahn saw himself during his days on the battlefield. Radahn inherited the furious flaming red hair of his father Radahn, and is fond of its heroic implications. I was born a champion's cub, but I am the lord of the battlefield's lion. Radahn saw himself as a lion, the very symbol of Godfrey's rule, and it's not unreasonable to assume his goal was to unite the lands between after the shattering through force, rather than diplomacy. That's what makes his vow to Miquella compelling. I believe he never intended to keep it without a fight. Rather, it was part of a death pact, much like he made with his friend and general, Jaren. Miquella's dialogue tells us that he and someone else have a part to play in the pact with Radahn, specifically when he says, if we honor our part of the vow, promise me you'll be my consort. I believe this use of our is referring to Miquella and Malenia, fulfilling a sort of duty to Radahn. Witch Hunter Jaren's eccentric armor tells us, Jaren preferred a nomadic existence, but after spending time as a guest of the Carian royals, he became a guest commander for General Radahn, and for the first time, the restless tumbleweed would be bound by honorable oath, and his hood tells us this was an oath of honorable death. We help Jaren to fulfill his oath by defeating what is left of Starscourge Radahn as we make our way through the lands between, and it got me thinking, perhaps the vow made by Miquella to Radahn was one of honorable death, just as he had with Jaren. Depending on your opinion of Radahn, you can assume he would never be content with a world of kindness and peace, as he longed to be the strongest on the battlefield. However, that need to prove himself could be his reason for agreeing to become Miquella's consort. What if Miquella and Radahn made a vow that when Malenia came for Radahn's life, they would battle to the death, and if Malenia won, Radahn would become Miquella's consort? The young lion's helm tells us it is the golden helm worn by Radahn in his younger years, proudly displaying his heroic red hair. It is fitting attire for a lion. When Malenia, blade of Miquella, let the wrought flower blossom in Aeonia, Radahn heard a murmur in his ear. Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort. This gives us a reason why Malenia was so comfortable with essentially using chemical warfare against Radahn. In order for her brother's new rule to come to fruition, Radahn had to die at any cost. After all, what is the cost of peace and an age of compassion? What are the lives of Caelid when weighed against the lives of all those in the lands between? Unfortunately for Malenia, even her bloom was not enough to defeat the Starscourge. However, it was enough to weaken him to the point where we can put an end to the mindless creature she left behind, and Miquella could repurpose his spirit by using the body of Luminary Mohg. When ruminating on the promised consort and Miquella's true plans, I think we look at the story of Godwyn the Golden with new context. Clearly, while they likely had a good relationship, Godwyn did not live up to Miquella's expectations of what it meant to be the promised consort to the Age of Compassion. If you've watched our video on Godwyn, you know that I theorize he was not the paragon of virtue many assume him to be. Yes, he made peace with the dragons and was regarded as a hero, but when following the story of his descendant, Godric, and that of Kenneth Haight, it seems as though Godwyn may have used his station to be somewhat of a philanderer in the lands between, diluting the golden lineage by having children with common folk. With this in mind, and the knowledge that Miquella needed a vessel for his promised consort, I believe Miquella had a hand in the Night of Black Knives, and that Godwyn's body was his first choice for housing the soul of Radahn. We know Miquella and Ranni had some kind of relationship, due to her recognizing Torrent upon our first meeting, and the strongly held belief that Miquella was Torrent's former master. What if Ranni was aware of Miquella's plans as well, and killing Godwyn's soul was meant to make him a vessel? No one knew that the act of leaving him soulless would putrefy his flesh and make him the Prince of Death. So perhaps this was an unexpected consequence. Ranni would also have no issue with this plan, as her fate would be set back in motion by the release of the stars. We know through the dialogue of ghosts at Castle Sol that Miquella wanted to grant Godwyn a true death. In fact, it's even said in the description of the Golden Epitaph. A sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, infused with the humble prayer of a young boy. "O brother, Lord brother, please die a true death." If Godwyn could die a true death, his body could be used for Radahn's spirit. But since this was impossible, Miquella had to turn to another of his blood relatives, Luminary Mohg, who ultimately had his body used to create the promised consort. So it was that the remains of Luminary Mohg were used to bring Miquella's promised consort back to life and under his spell. I believe Radahn did make this vow to Miquella, on the condition that he could be defeated in battle, which I truly believe he never expected to be. Miquella, being a child with a childish view of his knightly brother, took him at his word, and started planning to make sure Malenia could defeat Radahn, and start the series of events that would lead to his ascension as the new god of the Lands Between. It was by pure coincidence that we found our way to the Lands Between, and managed to defeat not only the rotten remains of the Star Scourge, but also the luminary omen Mohg, giving Miquella all the pieces he needed to start on his path toward godhood. Miquella would have a kind lord to stand by his side, regardless of his true nature, thanks to our involvement. And the true battle for the future of the Lands Between would commence at the Divine Gate. Perhaps if it were possible to use Godwyn's body as a vessel for Radahn, things may have ended differently. But as it stands, I believe the omened body of Mohg was likely what gave us the edge in defeating Radahn. The strength of the promised consort is still awe-inspiring, but I don't believe it's quite as powerful as Radahn in his prime. And I believe the omen horns below his gloves, and the blood flame attacks he has access to, are proof of this. The promised consort is Miquella's idealized version of who Radahn was in life. He believes Radahn to be a peerless knight and kind soul who brought light wherever he went in the Lands Between. But we'll never know if that is who he truly was. In fact, we don't know if the promised consort is fighting for Miquella because he genuinely wanted to fulfill his vow, or if Miquella is simply controlling him, compelling affection in a way only he knows how. While he may be bereft of his great rune, Miquella is still able to steal our hearts as we fight him. So who's to say he isn't doing the same exact thing with the resurrected Radahn? In the end, it was a kindness when we put Radahn out of his misery the first time. And I believe it was again when we defeated the promised consort and freed his soul from the confines of Mohg's body. Miquella's childish view of his brother ultimately led to his death, another soul tossed aside in pursuit of a compassionate world. Perhaps if this compassion didn't need to be on Miquella's terms, things may have worked out differently. But as it stands, the promise is never truly fulfilled, and the world never experiences an age of compassion. Miquella, though ascending to a godlike form, never overcomes his curse, and Radahn can finally rest in peace, knowing that the same warrior granted him an honorable death not once, but twice. Thank you for listening to my findings and thoughts on the promised consort, and the questions surrounding him. Was Miquella involved in the Night of Black Knives, planning so early on for his ascension to godhood? Was Mohg always meant to be the vessel for Radahn's soul, or was Godwyn Miquella's first choice? Do you believe Radahn agreed to the terms of his vow with the caveat that he needed to be defeated in battle? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell, and set notifications to all so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore.